Good evening and happy New Year's Eve. Welcome to Who Day Weekly. I'm your host Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. I'm going to start things off a little bit differently. Usually I go over the Bengals recap and then I do the fantasy football. But this week I'm going to do the top 5 point getters for fantasy football for the year. So let's start off at quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson. He threw for 3,955 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. Ran for 852 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had a 2-point conversion and 5 lost fumbles, but he still had 407.40 points. Josh Allen, 3,731 passing yards, 28 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He ran for 531 yards for 12 touchdowns. He had a 1 reception for 7 yards and a touchdown, and he had a 2-point conversion and lost 2 fumbles. He had 379.04 fantasy points. Joe Burrow at number 3 threw for 4,641 yards, 42 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, ran for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns, lost 5 fumbles, had 359.84 fantasy points. Rookie Jaden Daniels threw for 3,530 yards, 25 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, rushed for 864 yards and 6 touchdowns, had 3 2-point conversions, and ended the year with 351.60 fantasy points. He had a great rookie year. Well, of course, we still have week 18, but this is, since I'm going over this, and I know everybody won their championships and fantasy football is over with, so I'm just going to give you guys their stats for right now for the year. Baker Mayfield at number 5 threw for 4,279 yards, 39 passing touchdowns. He threw for 15 interceptions, but he had 310 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a 1 2-point conversion, 2 fumble losses, but he still had 344.16 fantasy points. And then we'll go to our top 5 running backs for the year. Of course, we know Saquon Barkley, 2,005 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. He had 33 receptions for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 3 2-point conversions and only lost 1 fumble. He came in at 355.30 points at number 1. Jahmyr Gibbs at number 2 ran for 1,273 yards, 13 touchdowns, had 47 receptions for 486 yards and 3 touchdowns, lost 1 fumble. He had 316.90 fantasy points. Bijan Robinson for Atlanta had 1,286 yards rushing, 12 touchdowns, 59 receptions for 428 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 1 2-point conversion, and he finished the year with 310.40 fantasy points. Derrick Henry at number 4 for Baltimore. He had 1,783 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns, 17 receptions for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had 1 fumble loss for 306.30 fantasy points. At number 5, Devon Achane for Miami had 786 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns, but he had 78 receptions for 592 yards, which looks like it's the most from a running back, and had 6 receiving touchdowns for 281.80 fantasy points. And then to the wide receivers, and thanks for watching, guys. Let's see here. The wide receivers at number 1, of course, our own Jamar Chase for Cincinnati had 32 rushing yards. He had 117 receptions for 1,612 yards receiving, 16 touchdowns for 377.40 points. Justin Jefferson, his ex-teammate from LSU, for Minnesota, of course, had 22 passing yards. He had 3 rushing yards. He had 100 receptions for 1,479 receiving yards for 10 touchdowns. Came in at 309.8 fantasy points. Amon-Ra St. Brown for Detroit had 7 passing yards and 1 touchdown. He had 6 rushing yards. He had 109 receptions for 1,186 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. He had 1 fumble loss, but he ended the year with 302.48 fantasy points. Brian Thomas Jr. for Jacksonville, the rookie, had 48 rushing yards. He had 80 receptions for 1,179 yards, 10 touchdowns. He had 2 2-point conversions, and he had 266.70 fantasy points. At number 5, CeeDee Lamb for Dallas had 70 rushing yards, had 101 receptions for 1,194 yards, 6 touchdowns. He had 1 2-point conversion, 1 fumble loss for 263.40 points at number 5. Now to your tight ends. Brock Bowers. I know I've talked about Brock Bowers pretty much all year this year. You know, I know if you guys watched Running Through the Jungle with all of us, I wanted Brock Bowers, you know, during the preseason, during our draft talk and all that stuff. And unfortunately, we didn't get him because Las Vegas got him before we did. But he had 13 rushing yards. He had 108 receptions for 1,144 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, 247.70 fantasy points. George Kittle for San Francisco had 76 receptions for 1,079 yards, 8 touchdowns, 231.90 fantasy points. Trey McBride for Arizona had 2 rushing yards and a touchdown. He had 104 receptions for 1,081 yards and 1 touchdown. And he had a fumble TD for 230.30 fantasy points. Jonnu Smith for Miami had a negative 1 rushing yard, but he had 79 receptions for 828 yards and 7 touchdowns for 203.70 fantasy points. Travis Kelce from Kansas City had 1 rushing yard. He had 97 receptions for 823 yards and 3 touchdowns and 1 fumble loss for 195.40 points. Now to your kickers. Chris Boswell at number 1, of course. You know, I think he has probably the most points than any Steeler, but that's my own opinion. He had 33 PATs. He had a crap ton of field goals made. I'm not even gonna. I didn't even calculate them, but anyways, he had 177 fantasy points. Brandon Aubrey for Dallas had 29 PATs and a lot of field goals for 165 fantasy points. Fairbairn for Houston, 32 PATs for 163 fantasy points. Cameron Dicker the kicker for the Los Angeles Chargers, had 31 PATs and a crap ton of field goals made for 154 fantasy points. And then at number 5, Jason Sanders from Miami had 24 PATs and a crap ton of field goals as well for 153 fantasy points. I didn't calculate them, so I'm not gonna. It doesn't show me their total. Yeah, it doesn't show me their total. So sorry, guys, but they had a good year. Nice kicking. So to wrap it up to the defense, at number 1, the Denver Broncos. They had 58 sacks, 15 interceptions, 10 fumble recoveries, 2 safeties, 5 touchdowns, allowed 311 points for 166 fantasy points, and got beat by the Cincinnati Bengals on last Saturday. At number 2, the Minnesota Vikings defense had 47 sacks, 22 interceptions, 9 fumble recoveries, 3 touchdowns, allowed 293 points, and for a total of 153 fantasy points. The Green Bay Packers had 44 sacks, 16 interceptions, 13 fumble recoveries. Wow. Scored 1 touchdown for 300 and allowed 302 points. They had 139 fantasy points. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense comes in at number 4, 36 sacks, 116 interceptions, 15 fumble recoveries, and 1 touchdown. And then they also had a kick return for a touchdown, allowed 316 points, and had 131 fantasy points. Congratulations to you guys for winning their leagues. Oh, and sorry, at number 5, the Buffalo Bills defense comes in number 5. They had 38 sacks, 16 interceptions, 15 fumbles, 1 safety, scored 3 touchdowns, and allowed 345 points. And they ended the year with 130 fantasy points. Now I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back with you. All right, welcome back to Who Day Weekly. Again, I'm your host, Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. Now I'm going to provide a quick recap from Week 17 versus the Broncos. The Cincinnati Bengals pulled off a thrilling 30-24 victory over the Denver Broncos in overtime on Saturday. Joe Burrow had an impressive game, throwing for 412 yards and 3 touchdowns, all to T. Higgins, who finished with 11 receptions for 131 yards and 3 scores. The game was tied 24-24 at the end of regulations, with both teams exchanging touchdowns in the final minute and giving me heart palpitations and almost giving me a headache or a heart attack. It was stressful. But in overtime, Burrow connected with Higgins for a 3-yard touchdown pass to secure the win. This win keeps the Bengals' playoffs hope alive, but they'll need some help in Week 18. The Broncos are now 9-7. Still have a chance to clinch a playoff spot with a win against the Kansas City Chiefs next weekend. It was definitely an exciting game. And now to a little more onto that the playoff hopes for the Bengals. So the Bengals have to have, so the Colts lost against the New York Giants, believe it or not, on Sunday. So that puts the Colts out of it. But now we need the Dolphins to lose, and the Browns screwed that up for us because we all saw that debacle. So the Dolphins still need to lose. I believe they play the Jets on Sunday. And then the Broncos need to lose against Kansas City. Kansas City's not playing any of their starters, so I'm a 50-50 chance that they're going to win. And then the Bengals, they go in on Sunday and play against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh. That's a 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time game. The Bengals are coming in at 8-8, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are coming in at 10-6. There's a chance we could keep our playoff hopes alive. I don't know. I'm like, it is what it is. If we win, we win. I would love to beat the Steelers because, they're AFC North opponents and they've already beat us once. So if we can go in there and beat them this time, split that and keep our hopes alive. But I still believe that Denver's going to go into Kansas City and win that game because they're playing against all backups. Bo Nix is playing good football. Like I said, like I just went over in the fantasy football stats, the Denver Broncos defense is pretty much number one. I know they were number one in sacks going into Saturday's game with 51, and they sacked Burrow, I believe it was 7 times. So, they're leading the league in sacks, a lot of pressure. So I think that Kansas City, Taylor Heineke, I forget who the hell the backup is for Kansas City. It doesn't matter. But I think he's going to have his hands full with that defense. And I think the Broncos are going to end up winning anyways and, making it to the playoffs. Congratulations. But there's always that hope. But as we say on Running Through the Jungle, hope is not a strategy. So, we can hope it. But as a fan, I do hope the Bengals win on Saturday and the Broncos lose and the Dolphins lose. And we sneak into those playoffs. Joe Burrow's been having a great year. As I went over those fantasy stats a little bit ago, Joe Burrow's having a great year. Unfortunately, we're 8-8. Maybe if we were 12-4 right now, Joe Burrow would be a top contender for the MVP for the MVP. We know Jamar Chase right now is a Triple Crown winner right now. Our offense is playing great ball. We can't blame these losses on Joe Burrow. Our defense has not stepped up. Our defense hasn't been that great, but they did play. They played pretty good. I'm not going to say great on Saturday against the Broncos, but they did, hold them to 3 and outs and stuff like that. They gave us that chance in overtime with 2 3 and outs and got us the ball back in the end. And Joe Burrow was able to do what Joe Burrow does. And I know you've heard me on Running Through the Jungle. You've heard me on other podcasts that I've been on, that I believe Joe Burrow is top 2 quarterback. I believe he's number 1 in my book because I'm a Bengals fan, but Joe Burrow's one of the best quarterbacks out there right now. He's out there playing his butt off, and as you also know, Jamar Chase is the greatest wide receiver right now in this game right now. He's proven it. He's been bracketed. He's been double teamed. He's been triple teamed. but he's still leading the league in receptions and touchdowns and receiving yards. We got Chase Brown that finally got to start. Really, unfortunately for Zach Moss that we signed from the Colts, but Chase Brown finally been able to be a starting running back, RB1. I love, if you guys know me, I love running the damn ball. Running the damn ball is my slogan. Run the damn ball. It opens up so much more for Joe Burrow and the offense if you run the ball, if you get those yards, even if it's short yards. As we've seen, Chase Brown's been averaging over 4 yards a carry. He started on week 9. His stats are better than Joe Mixon. I know a lot of you Mixon fans, they're better or even pretty damn close. Well, actually pretty damn close to Joe Mixon, and Joe Mixon started the whole year long. So Chase Brown has done what he's done. As a Bengals fan and as a podcaster and running through the jungle, I've been analyzing the game a little bit more. Our defense hasn't been great. As everybody's seen, we lost a lot of games that we should have won because of our defense. We lost a lot of games, and I'm not going to make excuses because the refs can't call correct plays, or correct penalties, or call the correct calls. Like, I'll give you an example: Gesicki catching that touchdown in the end zone versus the Patriots. We should have won that game. The refs not calling holding penalties when Trey Hendrickson's beating up on that left tackle in Kansas City during that Kansas City week. I can go on. Look at the Ravens games. Every time we play the Ravens, they're like rabid dogs foaming out the mouth, and the refs aren't calling roughing the passer calls or face mask calls. We can go on and on, but it is what it is. This is what happened. We're 8-8. We turned it around. I'm hoping that we end up 9-8 so we can have a winning season. But I hope in the end that Joe Burrow and I hope they're listening to Joe Burrow and the rest of the guys and going, we need to build this team up, not just offensively, but defensively too. Trey Hendrickson can't be our only defensive threat in the game. So let's see what happens. We already know who we're going up against on Saturday. We're going against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've lost their last 3 games. I don't ever count those as wins because it's the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's AFC North football. It's grind. It's going to be a head-to-head battle. It's like gladiators going out there and fighting in the Coliseum on Saturday in Pittsburgh. They have not JJ, but they have TJ Watt. He's a hell of a pass rusher. They have Patrick Queen. They have Mika Fitzpatrick. They got Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. They got Russell Wilson, George Pickens. They're a good team. They've impressed me throughout this year because on paper, I always thought on paper they look good, but I didn't think that they would execute the way that they did. And congratulations, Pittsburgh, for making the playoffs. But I hope Cincinnati comes in there and wins. I hope we win. But anyways, that wraps up the Who Day Weekly. I want to tell you all, have a safe New Year's Eve if you go out there and you guys are still celebrating and partying and all that stuff and clubbing. I'm too old for that crap. So I'm going to be sitting here and relaxing, spending time with my family. I also want to tell my wife happy 16th anniversary. That'll be on the 2nd, not tomorrow, or not today, not tomorrow, but on the 2nd. That's our anniversary. Happy anniversary. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Enjoy some college football. We got a college football game today. I know I'm going on, but we have a college football game tonight. We have Penn State and Boise going on tonight, or here soon. I want to say probably within the next 20 to 45 minutes. I don't know. Coming on soon. Then we got Notre Dame and Georgia tomorrow. We got Ohio State and Oregon, and we have Texas and Arizona State. So we got those college games coming on, and then of course we got the rest of this week 18 coming on. But I hope you guys enjoyed this show. I know I did it a little bit differently this time. And I know next week it's going to be even more different because fantasy football is over with, so I don't have any fantasy football to go over with. If you guys have any ideas or comments or whatever, feel free to comment on these videos, on these shows that I do, because I would love to have some, kind of like put this thing together so we can have another show out there. But I hope you guys enjoyed my content. But if you guys want to hear our reactions to the games, check out the Roaring Reactions on YouTube, or listen to on all your podcasts, your favorite podcast platforms weekly. I always screw that up every time. And also, this week we're not going to be doing a Running Through the Jungle on Wednesday because that's New Year's Day. But they'll be doing it on, I believe we're doing it on Thursday. I'm not going to be there because it's my wife and I's anniversary. But you guys can check out Running Through the Jungle on Thursday and they're going to talk about the Steelers game. Justin and Brandon will be there. Maybe Chase will show up. Chase Younts will show up. But other than that, you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. Happy New Year, and have a safe day. Take care.